You saw nothing. Hi, darlings. It's gonna be a very chill night. I have had a bunch of misadventures with packages, and I think in the efforts to stay warm, I've given myself a blister on my feet. And oh my goodness, I can hear myself. Uh, how do I stop that? There we go. But so, we are going to be reading Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. I have a big old book. They are all out of copyright, so I am very secure. Um, but unlike when I usually do these, I haven't really planned them in advance. But I needed something that I can kind of turn my brain off a little for. So reading stories that I genuinely enjoy, and some of them I haven't read in a while. And then I have, we're gonna call it mystery tea because it is strange. Uh, like, it doesn't look like what I expected. I thought it would be a white tea. It doesn't taste like a white tea. It just tastes weird. Um, so. I should. Let me get. Let's go here. Text and create new text, and we will call this short story titles. Okay. And that's probably a fine font. I mean, it's a boring font, but it's fine. And then let's see where we should start. There's always the Little Mermaid. That one's always good. Let's see. I mean, it's cold enough. I think Little Match Girl is Hans Christian Andersen. I mean, it's not a happy story, granted, but let's see. There we go. So let's start. Oh, it's massive. All right. Nope, that's a hyphen. How do I make you smaller? Let's see. If I put it there, everybody can read that. Really easy to see. Y'all don't have the box that I have. Alrighty. So for a wintry story, since I did promise you one, let's start with this one. So these are all Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. So if you're wondering, That's who the author is. I'm not going to put it up for all of them because it's the same one. It was terribly cold and nearly dark on the last eve. Oh, that's going to be a problem. Hang on. I have a slipcover. And it's sliding. There we go. It was terribly cold and nearly dark on the last evening of the old year, and the snow was falling fast. In the cold and darkness, a poor little girl with bare head and naked feet roamed through the streets. It is true she had on a pair of slippers when she left home, but they were not of much use. They were very large, so large indeed that they had belonged to her mother, and the poor little creature had lost them in running across the street to avoid two carriages that were rolling along at a terrible rate. One of the slippers she could not find, and a boy seized upon the other and ran away with it, saying that he could use it as a cradle when he had children of his own. So the little girl went on with her little naked feet, which were quite red and blue with the cold. In an old apron she carried a number of matches, and had a bundle of them in her hands. No one had bought anything of her the whole day, nor had anyone given her even a penny. Shivering with cold and hunger, she crept along. Poor little child. She looked the picture of misery. The snowflakes fell on her long, fair hair, which hung in curls on her shoulders, but she regarded them not. Lights were shining from every window, and there was a savory smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve. Yes, she remembered that. In a corner between two houses, one of which projected beyond the other, she sank down and huddled herself together. She had drawn her little feet under her, but she could not keep off the cold, and she dared not go home, for she had sold no matches, and could not take home even a penny of money. Her father would certainly beat her. Besides, it was almost as cold at home as here, for they had only the roof to cover them, through which the wind howled, although the largest holes had been stopped up with straw and rags. Her little hands were almost frozen with cold. Ah, but perhaps a burning match might be some good, if she could draw it from the bundle and strike it against the wall just to warm her fingers. She drew one out. Scratch! How it sputtered as it burnt! It gave a warm, bright light, like a little candle, as she held her hand over it. It really was a wonderful light. It seemed to the little girl that she was sitting by a large iron stove with polished brass feet and brass ornament. How the fire burned and seemed so beautifully warm that the child stretched out her feet as if to warm them, when lo, the flame of the match went out, the stove vanished, and she had only the remains of the half-burnt match in her hand. She rubbed another match on the wall. It burst into flame. Where its light fell upon the wall, it became transparent as a veil. She could see into the room. The table was covered with a snowy white tablecloth, on which stood a splendid dinner service and a steaming roast goose, stuffed with apples and dried plums. And what was still more wonderful, the goose jumped down from the dish and waddled across the floor with knife and fork in its breast to the little girl. Then the match went out, and there remained nothing but a thick, damp, cold wall before her. She lighted another match, and then found herself sitting under a beautiful Christmas tree. It was larger and more beautifully decorated than the one which she had seen through the glass door at the rich merchant's. Thousands of tapers were burning upon the green branches, and colored pictures like those she had seen in the show windows looked down upon it all. The little one stretched out her hand towards them, and the match went out. The Christmas lights rose higher and higher till they looked to her like the stars in the sky. Then she saw a star fall, leaving behind it a bright streak of fire. "Someone is dying," thought the little girl, for her old grandmother, the only one who ever loved her, and who was now dead, had told her that when a star falls, a soul was going up to God. She again rubbed a match on the wall, and the light shone round her. In the brightness stood her old grandmother, clear and shining, yet mild and loving in her appearance. Grandmother, cried the little one, oh, take me with you. I know you will go away when the match burns out. You will vanish like the warm stove, the roast goose, and the large, glorious Christmas tree. And she made haste to light the whole bundle of matches, for she wished to keep her grandmother there, and the matches glowed with a light that was brighter than the noonday, and her grandmother had never appeared so large or so beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and they both flew upwards in brightness and joy far above the earth, where there was neither cold, nor hunger, nor pain, for they were both with God. In the dawn of the morning there lay the poor little one, with pale cheeks and smiling mouth. Leaning against the wall, she had frozen to death on the last evening of the year, and the New Year's sun rose and shone upon a little corpse. The child still sat in the stiffness of death, holding the matches in her hand, one bundle of which was burnt. She tried to warm herself, said some. No one imagined what beautiful things she had seen, nor into what glory she had entered with her grandmother on New Year's Day. Oh, these two are... So, the problem with Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales is a lot of them are sad. And I say that's a problem. It's not actually a problem. It's just an observation. Do we want a short one or a longer one? Because there's two right in a row here that I am immensely fond of, but one of them is much longer than the other. Let's do the shorter one. It's another melancholy one. As I said, a lot of these are, because that's just the nature of the beast. Let's see, how do I... Properties. Here we go. So this one... Oh, that's not how you spell that. Oh, excuse me. Which, I'm pretty sure I know this one by a different name, unless they're two different stories. I'm 99% sure they are the same story, though. Because I think this is the Steadfast Tin Soldier. But I want to say I remember it from, like, Fantasia, I think. I remember a version without words, and then reading the actual story. So, I think it was something like, there was a Fantasia. I can look this up right quick. Hang on. Let's see. Let's go here. Is the Brave Tin Soldier and the Steadfast Tin Soldier the same? Let's see. One of them is a ballet. most things say the name is the Steadfast Tin Soldier. Alright, well. Inconclusive. The answer is inconclusive. But let's read this one. There were once 25 tin soldiers, who were all brothers, for they had been made out of the same old tin spoon. They shouldered arms and looked straight before them and wore splendid uniform, red and blue. The first thing in the world they had ever heard were the words, "Tin soldiers," uttered by a little boy who clapped his hands with delight when the lid of the box in which they lay was taken off. They were given to him for a birthday present, and he stood at the table to set them up. The tin soldiers were all exactly alike, excepting one, who had only one leg. He had been left the last, and then there was not enough of the melted tin to finish him, so they made him to stand firmly on one leg, and this caused him to be very remarkable. The table on which the tin soldier stood was covered with other playthings, but the most attractive to the eye was a pretty little paper castle. Through the small windows of the rooms could be seen, in the front of the castle, a number of little trees surrounded a piece of looking-glass, which was intended to represent a transparent lake. Swans made of wax swam on the lake and were reflected in it. And all of this was very pretty, but the prettiest of all was a tiny little lady who stood at the open door of the castle. She, also, was made of paper, and she wore a dress of clear muslin with a narrow blue ribbon over her shoulders just like a scarf. In front of these was fixed a glittering tinsel rose, as large as her whole face. The little lady was a dancer, and she stretched out both her arms and raised one of her legs so high that the tin soldier could not see it at all, and he thought that she, like himself, had only one leg. "That is the wife for me," he thought, "but she is too grand and lives in a castle, while I have only a box to live in, 25 of us altogether. That is no place for her. Still, I must try and make her acquaintance." Then he laid himself at full length on the table, behind a snuff-box that stood upon it, so that he could peep at the delicate little lady, who continued to stand on one leg without losing her balance. When evening came, the other tin soldiers were all placed in the box, and the people of the house went to bed. Then the playthings began to have their own games together, to pay visits, to have sham fights, and to give balls. The tin soldiers rattled in their box. They wanted to get out and join the amusements, but they could not open the lid. The nutcrackers played at leapfrog, and the pencil jumped about the table. There was such a noise that the canary woke up and began to talk, and in poetry, too. Only the tin soldier and the dancer remained in their places. She stood on tiptoe, with her legs stretched out, as firmly as he did on his one leg. He never took his eyes from her for even a moment. The clock struck 12, and with a bounce, up sprang the lid of the snuff-box. But instead of snuff, there jumped up a little black goblin, for the snuff-box was a toy puzzle. "Tin soldier," said the goblin, "don't wish for what does not belong to you." But the tin soldier pretended not to hear. "Very well. Wait till tomorrow, then," said the goblin. When the children came in the next morning, they placed the tin soldier in the window. Now, whether it was the goblin who did it, or the drow, it is not known, but the window flew open, and out fell the tin soldier, heels over head, from the 3rd story into the street beneath. It was a terrible fall, for he came head downwards, his helmet and bayonet stuck between the flagstones, his one leg up in the air. The servant maid and a little boy went down the stairs directly to look for him, but he was nowhere to be seen, although once they nearly trod upon him. If he had called out, "Here I am," it would have been all right, but he was too proud to cry out for help while he wore a uniform. Presently it began to rain, and the drops fell faster and faster, till there was a heavy shower. When it was over, 2 boys happened to pass by. One of them said, "Look, there is a tin soldier. He ought to have a boat to sail in." So they made a boat out of newspaper and placed the tin soldier in it and sent him sailing down the gutter while the two boys ran by the side of it and clapped their hands. Good gracious, what large waves arose in that gutter, and how fast the stream rolled on, for the rain had been very heavy. The paper boat rocked up and down and turned itself round sometimes, so quickly that the tin soldier trembled. Yet he remained firm. His countenance did not change. He looked straight before him, shouldered his musket. Suddenly the boat shot under a bridge which formed part of a drain, and then it was dark as the tin soldier's box. "Where am I going now?" thought he. "This is the black goblin's fault, I am sure. Ah, well, if the little lady were only here with me in the boat, I should not care for any darkness." Suddenly there appeared a great water rat that lived in the drain, very large and not at all like the others. Nope, I have skipped a story. Hang on, that is the ugly duckling. There we go. I'm like, wait a minute, why does it say duckling? Large water rat duckling. Have you a passport? Asked the rat. "Give it to me at once." But the tin soldier remained silent and held his musket tighter than ever. The boat sailed on, and the rat followed it. How he did gnash his teeth and cry out to the bits of wood and straw, "Stop him! Stop him! He has not paid toll and has not shown his pass." But the stream rushed on, stronger and stronger. The tin soldier could already see daylight shining from where the arch ended, and then he heard a roaring sound, quite terrible enough to frighten the bravest man. At the end of the tunnel, the drain fell into a large canal over a steep place, which made it as dangerous for him as a waterfall would be to us. He was too close to it to stop, so the boat rushed on, and the poor tin soldier could only hold himself as stiffly as possible, without moving an eyelid, to show that he was not afraid. The boat whirled round 3 or 4 times, and filled with water to the very edge. Nothing could save it from sinking. He now stood up to his neck in water, while deeper and deeper sank the boat, and the paper became soft and loose with wet, till at last the water closed over the soldier's head. He thought of the elegant little dancer whom he should never see again, and the words of the song sounded in his ears. "Farewell, warrior, ever brave, drifting onward to thy grave." Then the paper boat fell to pieces, and the soldier sank into the water, and immediately afterwards was swallowed up by a great fish. Oh, how dark it was inside the fish! A great deal darker than the tunnel, and narrower too. But the tin soldier continued firm, and laid at full length, shouldering his musket. The fish swam to and fro, making the most wonderful movements, but at last he became quite still. After a while, a flash of lightning seemed to pass through him, and then daylight approached, and a voice cried out, "I declare, here is the tin soldier!" The fish had been caught, taken to market, sold to the cook, who had taken him to the kitchen, cut him open with a large knife, and picked up the tin soldier and held him by the waist between her finger and thumb. She carried him up into the room. They were all anxious to see this wonderful soldier who had traveled about inside a fish, but he was not at all proud. They placed him on the table, and how many curious things do happen in the world! There he was in the very same room from the window of which he had fallen, and there were the same children, the same playthings standing on the table, and the pretty castle with an elegant little dancer at the door. She balanced herself on one leg, held up the other so she was as firm as himself. It touched the tin soldier so much to see her that he almost wept tin tears, but kept them back. He only looked at her, and they both remained silent. Presently one of the little boys took up the tin soldier and threw him into the stove. He had no reason for doing so. Therefore it must have been the fault of the black goblin that lived in the snuff-box. The flames lightened up the tin soldier. As he stood, the heat was very terrible, but whether it proceeded from the real fire or from the fire of love, he could not tell. Then he could see the bright colors were faded from his uniform, but whether they had been washed off during his journey or from the effects of his sorrow, none could say. He looked at the little lady, and she looked at him, and he felt himself melting away, but he still remained firm with his gun on his shoulder. Suddenly the door to the room flew open, and the draught of air caught up the little dancer. She fluttered like a sylph right into the stove by the side of the tin soldier, and was instantly in flames, and was gone. The tin soldier melted down into a lump, and the next morning, when the maidservant took the ashes out of the stove, she found him in the shape of a little tin heart. But the little dancer, nothing remained but the tinsel rose, which was burnt black as a cinder. I always liked that one. I know that's weird to say about a story that ends in tragedy, but I like tragedy. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't need tragedy all the time or anything like that. But a little bit of tragedy is fine. This is some strange tea. Alright, should I try to find a happier story? I can't promise because most of these aren't happy. Let's see, what do we have? Let's see. I feel like I know that one and I don't think it's happy. Oh, hang on. Not red shoes, that's not happy. Let's see. I always forget that this one is Hans Christian Andersen. Oh, let me change this. I gotta move this so I can type. There we go. If you've ever there we go. If you've ever wondered how many of your familiar fairy tales are in fact Hans Christian Andersen, the answer is like 50 to 75% of them. Then you've got a bunch that are French and some that are Russian. That's kind of how, well, and the Brothers Grimm, so the German ones. But like that's kind of how the most popular ones break down is Andersen has the lion's share, then you probably have Grimm, then you have the French fairy tales, of which there are many, and then you've got the Russian fairy tales, like Snow White and Rose Red, and the Firebird, and those. I like the Russian fairy tales. I would have to go find... I don't think I have a book of... I have a picture book of Russian fairy tales. I don't think I have a collection. I have a collection of Indian fairy tales? I think I have Indian fairy tales. And then I have Brothers Grimm. And Andersen, obviously. But yeah, so if you've ever wondered, oh, where's this fairy tale from? Denmark. It's probably from Denmark. So, The Princess and the Pea. Once upon a time, there was a prince who wanted to marry a princess, but she would have to be a real princess. He traveled all over the world to find one, but nowhere could get what he wanted. There were princesses enough, but it was difficult to find out whether they were real ones. There was always something about them that was not as it should be, so he came home again and was sad, for he would have very much liked to have a real princess. One evening a terrible storm came on, and there was thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down in torrents. Suddenly, a knocking was heard at the city gate, and the old king went to open it. It was a princess standing out there in front of the great gate, but good gracious, what a sight the rain and wind made her look. The water ran down her hair and clothes, and ran down into the toes of her shoes, and out again at the heels. And yet, she said she was a real princess. Well, we'll soon find out, thought the old queen. But she said nothing, went into the bedroom, took all the bedding off the bedstand, and laid a pea on the bottom. Then she took 20 mattresses and laid them on the pea, and then 20 eider-down beds on top of the mattresses. And on top of this, the princess had to lie all night. In the morning, she was asked how she slept. "Oh, very badly," said she. "I have scarcely closed my eyes all night. Heaven only knows what was in the bed, but I was lying on something hard so that I am black and blue all over my body. It's horrible." Now they knew that she was a real princess because she had felt the pea through the 20 mattresses and 20 eider-down beds. Nobody but a real princess could be as sensitive as that. So the prince took her for his wife, and now that he knew he had a real princess, and the pea was put in the museum where it may still be seen if no one has stolen it. There. That's a true story. The other thing about fairy tales, as I'm looking for another one, to remember is that even in the Brothers Grimm, where they collected other people's stories, some of them are like 3 sentences, and others of them are pages long. So, yeah. Let's see. Let's see. Because I'm trying to remember what exactly these stories are. Sometimes I can tell by their names, and other times I forget just what they are. Let's do... That is 680. Alright, so for something else cold, let me update this. And then after this one, I'll probably get me some more tea and then do Thumbelina, because that one is a longer one. And hopefully I don't accidentally turn to the Ugly Duckling again, because those are over by each other. So, the snowdrop. It was winter time, the air was cold, the wind was sharp, but within the closed doors it was warm and comfortable, and within the closed doors lay the flower. It lay in the bulb under snow-covered earth. One day rain fell. The drops penetrated through the snowy covering down into the earth and touched the flower bulb, and talked of the bright world above. Soon the sunbeam pierced its way through the snow to the root, and within the root there came a stirring. "Come in," said the flower. "I cannot," said the sunbeam. "I am not strong enough to unlock the door. When summer comes, I shall be strong." "When will it be summer?" asked the flower, and she repeated this question each time a new sunbeam made its way down to her. But the summer was yet far distant, and snow still lay upon the ground, and there was a coat of ice on the water every night. "What a long time it takes! What a long time it takes," said the flower. "I feel a stirring and a striving within me. I must stretch myself. I must unlock the door. I must get out and must nod good morning to the summer, and what a happy time that will be." And the flower stirred and stretched itself within the thin rind which the water had softened from without, and the snow and earth had warmed, and the sunbeam had knocked at, and it shot forth under the snow with a greenish-white blossom on a green stalk, with narrow, thick leaves which seemed to want to protect it. The snow was cold, but it was pierced by the sunbeam, therefore it was easy to get through it, and now the sunbeam came with greater warmth than before. "Welcome, welcome," sang and sounded every ray, and the flower lifted itself up over the snow into the brighter world. The sunbeam caressed and kissed it, so that it opened altogether, white as snow, and ornamented with green stripes. It bent its head in joy and humility. "Beautiful flower," said the sunbeams, "how graceful and delicate you are. You are the first. You are the only one. You are our love. You are the bell that rings out for summer, beautiful summer, over country and town. All the snow will melt, and the cold winds be driven away. We shall rule, and all will become green. And then you will have companions, syringas and laburnums and roses. But you are the first, so graceful, so delicate." That was a great pleasure. It seemed as if the air were singing and sounding, as if rays of light were piercing through the leaves and stalks of the flower. There it stood, so delicate and so easily broken, and yet so strong in its young beauty. It stood there in a white dress with green stripes and made a summer. But there was a long time yet for the summertime, and clouds hid the sun, and bleak winds were blowing. "You have come too early," said the wind and weather. "We have still the power, and you shall feel it and give it up to us. You should have stayed quietly at home, and should not have run out to make a display of yourself. Your time is not come yet." It was cutting cold, and the days which now come brought not a single sunbeam. It was the weather that might break such little flower in two with cold. But the flower had more strength than she herself knew of. She was strong in joy and in faith in summer, which would be sure to come, which had been announced by her deep longing and confirmed by warm sunlight, and so she remained standing in confidence in the snow in her white garment, bending her head even while the snowflakes fell thick and heavy and icy winds swept over her. "You'll break," they said, "and fade and fade. What did you want here? Why did you let yourself be tempted? The sunbeam only made game of you, and now you have what you deserve, you summer gawk." "Summer gawk," she repeated in a cold morning hour. "Oh, summer gawk," cried the children, rejoicing. Yonder stands one, how beautiful, the first and only one. These words did the flower so much good. They seemed to her like warm sunbeams. In her joy, the flower did not even feel it when it was broken off, and lay in a child's hand, and was kissed by a child's mouth, and carried into a warm room, and looked on by gentle eyes, and put into water. How strengthening, how invigorating! The flower thought she had suddenly come upon summer. The daughter of the house, a beautiful little girl, was confirmed when she had a friend who confirmed it too. He was studying for an examination, an appointment. He shall be my summer gawk, she said, and she took the delicate flower and laid it in a piece of scented paper, on which verses were written, beginning with summer and ending with summer. My friend was a winter gawk. She had twitted him with summer, and yes, all this in verse, and the paper folded up like a letter, and the flower was folded in the letter too, and it was dark around her, dark as those days when she lay hidden in the bulb. And the flower went forth on her journey, and lay in the post bag, and was pressed and crushed, which was not at all pleasant, but that soon came to an end. The journey was over, the letter opened, and read by the dear friend. And how pleased he was! He kissed the letter, and it was laid with its enclosure of verses in a box, in which there were many beautiful verses, but all of them without flowers. She was the first, the only one, as the sunbeams had called her, and it was a pleasant enough thing to think of that. She had time enough, moreover, to think about it, and she thought of it while summer passed away and long winters went by, and summer came again, before she appeared once more. But now the young man was not pleased at all. He took hold of the letter roughly and threw the verses away, so the flower fell on the ground, flat and faded. She certainly was, but why should she be thrown in the ground? Still, it was better here than the fire, where the verses and paper were being burnt to ashes. What had happened? What happens so often? The flower had made a gawk of him, and that was jest, and the girl had made a fool of them, and that was no jest, and she had, during the summer, chosen another friend. Next morning the sun shone upon the little flattened snowdrop that looked as if it had been painted upon the floor. The servant girl, who was sweeping out the room, picked it up and laid it in one of the books which was open upon the table, in the belief that it might have fallen out while the room was being arranged. And again the flower lay among verses, printed verses, and they are better than written ones. At least more money had been spent upon them. And after this, years went by, and the book stood upon the bookshelf, and then it was taken up, and somebody read out of it. It was a good book, verses and songs by an old Danish poet, Ambrosius Stubb, which are all well worth reading. The man was now reading the book and turned over a page. "Why, there's a flower," he said, "a snowdrop, a summer gawk, a poet gawk. That flower must have been put there with meaning. Poor Ambrosius Stubb. He was a summer fool, too, and a poet fool. He came too early before his time, and therefore had to taste the sharp winds and wander about as a gust from one noble land proprietor to another, like a flower in a glass of water, a flower in rhymed verses. Summer fool, winter fool, fun and folly. But the first and only fresh young Danish poet of those days. Yes, thou shalt remain as token in the book, thou little snowdrop. Thou hast been put there with meaning." And so the snowdrop was put back in the book, and felt equally honored and pleased to know that it was a token in the glorious book of songs that he who was the first to sing and write had also been a snowdrop, had also been a summer gawk, and had looked upon the winter time as a fool, and the flower understood this, in her way, as we interpret everything in our way. That is the story of the snowdrop. And now I'm going to have to look this up and make sure I was pronouncing it correctly through this whole story, because I am not entirely sure I was. Let's see. How do you pronounce? Is it gauche? It's not spelled gauche. All of that has a W. I know how to pronounce it with a W. Is it the same? No, no, no. I want that. Yeah. No. I think it is Gawk. Danish. I'm going to assume that's correct. I cannot find... Everything tries to correct it to gawk, like to gape and gawk, with a W, which I know how to pronounce that. But this doesn't have a W in it. It has an AU. Which, like, my brain is telling me that gawk is still correct, but I don't actually know that. Like, not 100% for sure. All right, let me flip back over to Thumbelina, and let me get some more. Ooh, oh, that's the Snow Queen. That's not a happy story either. Where is Little Tiny? Little Tiny or Thumbelina? I have such a soft spot for this story. It's entirely because of the animated movie. All right, give me a second to go get some more tea, and I will be right back. Alrighty. I am back. I have no clue if this is the right temperature for this tea because I still don't know what kind of tea it actually is. It tastes weird, but fine, I guess. Alright, we will see how much Thumbelina kills my voice because it is much longer than the other ones we have read. At least I kind of know what to expect from this one. And there shouldn't be any craziness, but we will see. And if my voice is okay after this one, let's see. I wonder if that is... Let me check one real quick. I'm still gonna do Thumbelina next, but... Is this the one I think it is? I guess it's not. I thought this was... Oh, that is a story and a half. That would have been the whole thing. Yeah, we're not doing that one. Okay. Sorry, I thought one was a folktale that I knew, but it's not. It's a different story. Which I should know because I know the other one's technically a folktale and not a fairy tale, but, you know. The definition of fairy tales is interpreted different ways by different people. No matter how I feel about what defines a fairy tale. Alright, so... Thumbelina. So, Little Tiny or Thumbelina. There once was a woman who wished very much to have a little child, but she could not obtain her wish. At last she went to a fairy and said, "I should so very much like to have a little child. Can you tell me where I can find one?" "Oh, that can easily be managed," said the fairy. "Here is a barley corn of a different kind to those which grow in the farmer's fields, which the chickens eat. Put it into a flower pot and see what will happen." "Thank you," said the woman, and she gave the fairy 12 shillings, which was the price of the barley corn. Then she went home and planted it, and immediately there grew up a large, handsome flower, something like a tulip in appearance, but with leaves tightly closed as if it were still a bud. "It is a beautiful flower," said the woman, and she kissed the red and golden colored leaves, and when she did so, the flower opened, and she could see that it was a real tulip. Within the flower, upon green velvet stamens, sat a very delicate and graceful little maiden. She was scarcely half as long as a thumb, and they gave her the name Thumbelina, or Tiny, because she was so small. A walnut shell, elegantly polished, served her for a cradle. Her bed was formed of blue-violet leaves, with rose-leaf as a counterpane. Here she slept at night, but during the day she amused herself on a table where the woman had placed a plate full of water. Round this plate were wreaths of flowers with their stems in the water, and upon it floated a large tulip leaf, which served Tiny for a boat. Here the little maiden sat and rowed herself from side to side with 2 oars made of white horsehair. It was really a very pretty sight. Tiny could also sing, so softly and sweetly that nothing like her singing had ever been heard. One night, when she lay in her pretty bed, a large, ugly, wet toad crept through a broken pane of glass in the window, leaped right down upon the table where Tiny lay sleeping under her rose-leaf quilt. What a pretty little wife this would make for my son, said the toad, and she took up the walnut shell in which Tiny lay asleep, jumped through the window, and with it into the garden. In the swampy margin of a broad stream in the garden lived the toad with her son. He was even uglier than his mother, and when he saw the pretty little maiden in her elegant bed could only cry, "Croak, croak, croak." "Don't speak so loud or she will wake," said the toad, "and then she might run away, for she is light as swan's down. We will place her on one of the water lily leaves out in the stream. It will be like an island to her. She is so light and small and cannot escape. And while she is away, we will make haste and prepare the stateroom under the marsh in which you are to live when you are married." Far out into the stream grew a number of water lilies, with broad green leaves which seemed to float upon the top of the water. The largest of these leaves appeared further off than the rest, and the old toad swam out to it with the walnut shell, in which little Tiny lay still asleep. The tiny little creature woke very early in the morning, and began to cry bitterly when she found out where she was, for she could see nothing but water on every side of the large green leaf, and no way of reaching the land. Meanwhile, the old toad was very busy under the marsh, decking her room with rushes and wild yellow flowers to make it look pretty for her new daughter-in-law. Then she swam out with her ugly son to the leaf on which she had placed poor little Tiny. She wanted to fetch the pretty bed, that she might put it in the bridal chamber to be ready for her. The old toad bowed low to her in the water and said, "Here is my son. He will be your husband, and you will live happily in the marsh by the stream." "Croak, croak, croak," was all her son could say for himself. So the toad took up the elegant little bed and swam away with it, leaving Tiny all alone on the green leaf, where she sat and wept. She could not bear to think of living with the old toad and having her ugly son for a husband. The little fishes who swam about in the water beneath had seen the toad and heard what she said, so they lifted their heads above the water to look at the little maiden. As soon as they caught sight of her, they saw she was very pretty, and it made them very sorry to think that she must go live with the ugly toads. No, it must never be. So they assembled together in the water, round the green stalk which held the leaf on which the maiden stood, and gnawed away at the root with their teeth. Then the leaf floated down the stream, carrying Tiny far out of the reach of land. Tiny sailed past many towns, and little birds in the bushes saw her and sang, "What a lovely creature!" And so the leaf swam away with her farther and farther, till it brought her to other lands. A graceful little white butterfly constantly fluttered round her, and at last alighted on the leaf. Tiny pleased him, and she was glad of it, for now the toad could not possibly reach her, and the country through which she sailed was beautiful. The sun shone upon the water till it glittered like liquid gold. She took off her girdle and tied one end of it round the butterfly, and the other end of the ribbon she fastened to the leaf, which now glided much faster than ever, taking little Tiny with it as she stood. Presently a large cockchafer flew by. The moment he caught sight of her, he seized her round, delicate waist in his claws and flew with her into a tree. The green leaf floated away on the brook, and the butterfly flew with it, for he was fastened to it and could not get away. Oh, how frightened little Tiny felt when the chafer flew with her to the tree. But especially she was sorry for the beautiful white butterfly which he had fastened to the leaf, for he could not free himself and would die of hunger. But the bird did not trouble himself at all about the matter. He seated himself by her side on a large green leaf, and gave her honey from flowers to eat, and told her she was very pretty, though not in the least like him. After a time he turned up his feelers. Do I have a misprint or am I dumb? Dear Google, am I being dumb? And do I have a misprint? think I have a misprint, because that is a bug. Alright. Good to know. After a time, all of the cockchafers turned up their feelers and said, "She only has 2 legs, and how ugly that looks, and she has no feelers. Her waist is too slim. She is like a human being." "Oh, she is ugly," said all the ladies, though Tiny was very pretty. And then the cockchafer would run away with her, believed all the others when they said she was ugly, and would have nothing more to say to her, and told her to go where she liked. And then he flew down with her from the tree and placed her on a daisy. And she wept at the thought that she was so ugly that even the cockchafers would have nothing to say to her. And all the while she was really the loveliest creature that anyone could imagine, and as tender and delicate as a beautiful rose leaf. During the whole summer, little Tiny lived quite alone in a wide forest. She wove herself a bed with blades of grass and hung it up under a broad leaf to protect herself from the rain. She sucked honey from flowers for food and drank dew from their leaves every morning. And so passed the summer and the autumn, and then came winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung to her so sweetly were flown away, and the trees and flowers had withered, and the large clover leaf under the shelter of which she had lived was now rolled together and shriveled up. Nothing remained but a yellow, withered stalk. She felt dreadfully cold, for her clothes were torn, and she was herself so frail and delicate that poor little Tiny was nearly frozen to death. It began to snow, too, and the snowflakes, as they fell upon her, were like a whole shovelful falling upon one of us, for we are tall, and she was only an inch high. Then she wrapped herself in a dry leaf, but it cracked in the middle and could not keep her warm, and she shivered with cold. Near the wood in which she had been living lay a cornfield, but the corn had been cut a long time ago, and nothing remained but the bare, dry stubble standing up out in the frozen ground. It was to her like struggling through a large wood, and oh, how she shivered with cold, and came at last to the door of a field mouse, who had a little den under corn stubble. And there dwelt the field mouse in warmth and comfort, with a whole room full of corn, and a kitchen, and a beautiful dining room, and poor little Tiny stood before the door like a little beggar girl, and begged for a small piece of barley corn, for she had been without a morsel to eat for 2 days. "You poor little creature," said the field mouse, who was really a good field mouse. "Come into my warm room and dine with me." She was very pleased with Tiny and said, "You are quite welcome to stay all winter if you like, but you must keep my rooms clean and neat, and tell me stories, for I should like to hear them very much." And Tiny did all the field mouse asked her, and found herself very comfortable. "We shall have a visitor soon," said the field mouse one day. "My neighbor pays me a visit once a week. He is better off than I. He has large rooms and wears a beautiful black velvet coat. If you could only have him for a husband, you would be well provided for indeed. But he is blind, so you must tell him some of your prettiest stories." But Tiny did not feel at all interested about this neighbor, for he was a mole. However, he came and paid his visit, dressed in a black velvet coat. "He is very rich and learned, and his house is 20 times larger than mine," said the field mouse. And he was rich and learned, no doubt, but he always spoke slightingly of the sun and pretty flowers, because he had never seen them. And Tiny was obliged to sing to him, "Ladybird, ladybird, fly away home," and many other pretty songs. And the mole fell in love with her because she had such a sweet voice. But he said nothing yet, for he was very cautious. A short time before, the mole had dug a long passage under the earth, which led from the dwelling of the field mouse to his own. And here she had permission to walk with Tiny whenever she liked, but he warned them not to be alarmed at the sight of a dead bird which lay in the passage. It was a perfect bird, with a beak and feathers which could not have been dead long, and was lying just where the mole had made his passage. The mole took a piece of phosphorescent wood in his mouth, and it glittered like fire in the dark when he went before them to light their way through the long, dark passage. When they came upon the spot where lay the dead bird, the mole pushed his broad nose through the ceiling, and the earth gave way, so there was a large hole, and daylight shone into the passage. In the middle of the floor lay a dead swallow, his beautiful wings pulled close to his sides, his feet and head drawn up under his feathers, and the poor bird had evidently died of cold. It made Tiny very sad to see it, for she did love little birds. All summer they had sung and twittered for her beautifully. But the mole pushed it aside with his crooked legs and said, "He will sing no more now. How miserable it must be to be born little bird. I am thankful that none of my children will ever be birds, for they can do nothing but cry, tweet, tweet, and always die of hunger in the winter." "Yes, you may very well say that, clever man," exclaimed the field mouse. "What is the use of twittering? When winter comes, he must either starve or be frozen to death. Still, birds are very high-bred." Tiny said nothing, but when the two others had turned their backs on the bird, she stooped down and stroked along the soft feathers which covered his head, and kissed his closed eyelids. "Perhaps this was one that sang to me so sweetly in the summer, and how much pleasure it gave me, you dear pretty bird." And the mole now stopped up the hole through which daylight shone, and then accompanied the lady home. But during the night Tiny could not sleep, so she got out of bed and wove a large, beautiful carpet of hay, and then carried it to the dead bird and spread it over him, with some down from the flowers which she had found in the field mouse's room. It was soft as wool, and spread it evenly on each side of the bird, so that he may lie warmly in the cold earth. "Farewell, pretty little bird," she said. "Farewell, and thank you for your delightful singing in the summer, when all the trees were green, and the warm sun shone upon us." And then she laid her head on the bird's breast, and was alarmed immediately, for it seemed something inside the bird went thump-thump. It was the bird's heart. He was not really dead, only benumbed with the cold, and the warmth had restored him to life. In autumn, all the swallows fly away into warm countries, but if one happens to linger, the cold seizes it. It becomes frozen and falls down as if dead. It remains where it fell, and snow covers it. Tiny trembled very much. She was quite frightened, for the bird was large, a great deal larger than herself. She was only an inch high. But she took courage and laid the wool more thickly over the poor swallow, and then took a leaf which she had used for her own counterpane and laid it beside the head of the poor bird, and next morning she stole out to see him. He was alive, but very weak. He could only open his eyes for a moment to look at Tiny, who stood by him holding a piece of decayed wood in her hand, for she had no other lantern. "Thank you, pretty little maiden," he said. "I have been so nicely warmed that I shall soon regain my strength and be able to fly again to the warm sunshine." "Oh," said she, "it is cold out of doors now. It snows and freezes. Stay in your warm bed, and I will take care of you." Then she brought the swallow some water in a flower leaf, and after he had drank, he told her that he had wounded one of his wings in a thorn bush. Excuse me. And could not fly as fast as the others, who were soon away on their journey to find warm countries. And he had fallen at last to the earth, and could remember no more, nor how he came to be where she had found him. And the whole winter the swallow remained underground, and Tiny nursed him with care and love. Neither the mole nor the field mouse knew anything about it, for they did not like swallows. Very soon springtime came, and sun warmed the earth, and the swallow bade farewell to Tiny, and she opened the hole in the ceiling which the mole had made. The sun shone upon them so beautifully that the swallow asked her if she would like to go with him, and she could sit on his back, he said. He would fly away with her into the green woods. But Tiny knew it would make the field mouse very grieved if she left her in that manner. So she said, "No, I cannot." "Farewell, then, and farewell, you good pretty little maiden," said the swallow, and he flew out into the sunshine. Tiny looked after him, and tears rose in her eyes. She was very fond of the poor swallow. Tweet, tweet, sang the bird as he flew into the green woods, and Tiny felt very sad. She was not allowed to go out into the warm sunshine, and the corn which had been sown in the field over the house of the field mouse had grown high in the air and formed a thick wood to Tiny, who was only an inch in height. "You are going to be married, Tiny," said the field mouse. "My neighbor has asked for you, and what good fortune for a poor child like you. We will prepare wedding clothes, and they must be both woolen and linen. Nothing must be wanting when you are the mole's wife." Tiny had to turn the spindle, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders who were to weave day and night. Every evening the mole visited her and was continually speaking of the time when summer would be over. So he would continually keep his wedding day with Tiny. But now the heat of the sun was so great it burned the earth and made it quite hard like a stone. As soon as summer was over, the wedding would take place. But Tiny was not at all pleased, for she did not like the tiresome mole. Every morning when the sun rose, and every evening when it went down, she would creep out at the door, and as the wind blew aside the ears of corn so that she could see the blue sky, she thought about how beautiful and bright it seemed out there, and wished so much to see the dear swallow again. But he never returned, for by this time he had flown far away into the lovely green forest. When autumn arrived, Tiny had her outfit quite ready, and the field mouse said to her in 4 weeks the wedding must take place. And then Tiny wept and said she would not marry the disagreeable mole. "Nonsense," said the field mouse. "Don't be obstinate, or I shall bite you with my teeth. He is a very handsome mole, and the queen herself does not wear more beautiful velvets and furs. His kitchen and cellars are full. You ought to be very thankful for such a good fortune." And so the wedding day was fixed, on which the mole was to fetch Tiny away to live with him deep under the earth, never again to see the sun, because he did not like it. And the poor child was very unhappy at the thought of saying farewell to the beautiful sun. And as the field mouse had given her permission to stand at the door, she went to look out again. "Farewell, bright sun," she cried, stretching her arm out towards it. And then she walked a short distance from the house, for the corn had been cut and only dry stubble remained. "Farewell, farewell," she repeated, twining her arm around a little red flower that grew up at her side. "Greet the little swallow for me, if you should see him again." "Tweet, tweet," sounded over her head suddenly, and she looked up, and there was the swallow himself flying close by. As soon as he spied Tiny, he was delighted, and she told him how unwillingly she had to marry the ugly mole and live always beneath the earth and never see the bright sun any more. And as she told him, she wept. "Cold winter is coming," said the swallow, "and I am going to fly away to warmer countries. Will you go with me? You can sit on my back and fasten yourself with your sash, and we can fly away from the ugly mole and his gloomy rooms, and far away over the mountain into warmer countries, where the sun shines more brightly than here, and it is always summer, and the flowers bloom in great beauty. Fly now with me, dear Tiny. You saved my life when I lay frozen in the dark passage." "Yes, I will go with you," said Tiny, and she seated herself on the bird's back, with her feet on his outstretched wings, and tied her girdle to one of his strongest feathers. And then the swallow rose in the air, and flew over the forest, and over sea, and high above highest mountains, covered with eternal snow. And Tiny would have been frozen solid in the cold air, but crept under the bird's warm feathers, keeping her head uncovered so that she might admire beautiful lands as they passed. And at length they reached warm countries where the sun shines brightly, and the sky seems so much higher above the earth. And here on the hedges and by the wayside grew purple and green and white grapes, and lemons and oranges hung from the trees beside the woods, and the air was fragrant with myrtles and orange blossoms. And beautiful children ran along country lanes, playing with large, gay butterflies, and as the swallow flew farther and farther, every place appeared still more lovely. And at last they came to a blue lake, and by the side of it, shaded by trees of the deepest green, stood a palace of dazzling white marble built in the olden times, and vines clustered around its lofty pillars, and at the top were many swallows' nests, and one of these was home to the swallow who carried Tiny. "This is my house," said the swallow, "but it would not do for you to live here. You would not be comfortable. You must choose for yourself one of those lovely flowers, and I will put you down upon it, and then you shall have everything that you wish to make you happy." "That would be delightful," she said, and clapped her little hands for joy. A large marble pillar lay on the ground, which, in falling, had broken into 3 pieces, and between these pieces grew the most beautiful large white flowers. So the swallow flew down with Tiny and placed her on one of the broad leaves. But how surprised was she to see in the middle of the flower a tiny little man, as white and transparent as if he had been made of crystal. He had a gold crown on his head and delicate wings at his shoulders, and was not much larger than Tiny herself. He was the angel of the flower, for a tiny man and a tiny woman dwell in every flower, and this was the king of them all. "Oh, how beautiful he is," whispered Tiny to the swallow, and the little prince was at first quite frightened of the bird, who was like a giant compared to a delicate little creature such as himself. But when he saw Tiny, he was delighted, and thought her the prettiest little maiden he had ever seen. And he took the gold crown from his head and placed it on hers, and asked her name, and if she would be his wife and queen of all flowers. And this was certainly a very different sort of husband than the son of the toad or the mole with his black velvet and fur. And so she said yes to the handsome prince. And then all the flowers opened, and out of each came a little lady or a tiny lord, all so pretty it was quite a pleasure to look at them. Each of them brought Tiny a present, but the best gift was a pair of beautiful wings, which had belonged to a large white fly and they fastened them to Tiny's shoulders so that she might fly from flower to flower. Then there was much rejoicing, and the little swallow who sat above them in his nest was asked to sing a wedding song, which he did as well as he could. But in his heart he felt sad, for he was very fond of Tiny, and would have liked to never part from her again. "You must not be called Tiny any more," said the spirit of flowers to her. "It is an ugly name, and you are so very pretty. We will call you Maya." "Farewell, farewell," said the swallow, with a heavy heart, as he left the warm countries to fly back to Denmark. There he had a nest over the window of a house, in which dwelt the writer of fairy tales, and the swallow sang "Tweet, tweet," and from his song came the whole story. I'm not gonna lie, the fact that it just says "tweet, tweet" for most of the swallows singing just makes me think of Rockin' Robin. Even though I know he's a swallow. Also, I haven't read the original in a long time, and I forgot the prince is A, only at the end of the story, and B, made of crystal. Also, I love how Thumbelina's name, like, it's mentioned once at the beginning, and then it gets changed at the end. Fantastic. But a lot of that is the same. Oh. I don't think I can make it through another full story. That one was a lot. I could try to find a short one. Let me see. Is the Emperor's New Clothes in here? Because I'm pretty sure that's an Andersen. How long is that? Oh, wait. I haven't read this one in forever. I don't remember. Oh, this one is long too. I'm pretty sure that that is... Is this where the children of Lear? No, it's not. I don't think. I was gonna do the Wild Swans because I like Swan Maiden stories. But that one is roughly the same length as Thumbelina, and I don't think my voice is gonna last through all of it. Let me see if I can find something shorter. No, that's not the one I thought it was either. Let's see. Can't do Ice Maiden, that one's far too long. There's the Emperor's New Suit, which says it's only 3 pages. I can probably handle 3 pages. Probably. We'll find out. Let's see. I should be. Oh, it's not even 3 full pages. It's like 2 and a bit. Alright. This will be the last one, so let me update this. Ah. There we go. Also, a lot of these, not the Steadfast Tin Soldier, but if you have ever seen, there is an old movie with Danny Kaye as the main actor. I think it's just called Hans Christian Andersen. I love that movie, and I love the songs, and you can find the songs. Many of these are songs in that. And there is one for the Emperor's New Clothes. So I'm not gonna lie, I will probably be thinking about that as I read this. So, here we go. The Emperor's New Suit. Many years ago lived an emperor who thought so much of new clothes that he spent all his money in order to obtain them, and his only ambition was to be well dressed. He did not care for his soldiers, and the theater did not amuse him, and the only thing, in fact, that he thought anything of was to drive out and show a new suit of clothes. He had a coat for every hour of the day, and as one would say of a king, he is in his cabinet, so one could say of him, the emperor is in his dressing room. The great city where he resided was very, very gay, and every day many strangers from all parts of the globe arrived. One day 2 swindlers came to the city and made all the people believe they were weavers, and declared that they could manufacture the finest cloth to be imagined. And their colors and patterns, they said, were not only exceptionally beautiful, but the clothes made of their material possessed the wonderful quality of being invisible to any man who was unfit for his office or was unpardonably stupid. That must be a wonderful cloth, thought the emperor. If I were to be dressed in a suit made of this cloth, I should be able to find out which men in my empire were unfit for their places, and I could distinguish clever from stupid. I must have this cloth woven for me without delay. And he gave a large sum of money to the swindlers in advance that they should set to work without any loss of time. And they set up 2 looms and pretended to be very hard at work, but did nothing whatsoever on the looms. They asked for the finest silk and the most precious gold cloth, and all they got they did away with, and worked at the empty looms till late at night. I should very much like to know how they are getting on with the cloth, thought the emperor, but he felt rather uneasy when he remembered that he who was not fit for his office could not see it. Personally, he was of the opinion that he had nothing to fear, yet he thought it advisable to send somebody else first to see how matters stood. Everybody in the town knew what a remarkable quality the stuff possessed, and were all anxious to see how bad, or stupid, their neighbors were. I shall send my honest old minister to the weavers, thought the emperor. He can judge best how the stuff looks, for he is intelligent, and nobody understands his office better than he. And the good old minister went into the room where the swindlers sat before empty looms. Heaven preserve us, he thought, and opened his eyes wide. I cannot see anything at all. But he did not say so. Both swindlers requested him to come near and asked him if he did not admire the exquisite pattern and the beautiful colors, and pointing to empty looms. And the poor old minister tried his very best, but he could see nothing, for there was nothing to be seen. Oh dear, he thought, can I be so stupid? I should never have thought so, and nobody must know. It is possible that I am not fit for my office. No, I cannot say that I am unable to see the cloth. Now, have you got nothing to say? Said one of the swindlers, while he pretended to be busily weaving. Oh, it is very pretty, exceedingly beautiful, replied the old minister, looking through his glasses. What a beautiful pattern, what brilliant colors! I shall tell the emperor that I like the cloth very much. We are pleased to hear that, said the 2 weavers, and described to him the colors and explained the curious pattern. And the old minister listened attentively, as he might relate to the emperor what they said. And so he did. Now the swindlers asked for more money and silk and gold cloth, which they required for weaving, and they kept everything for themselves, and not a thread came near the loom. But they continued as hitherto to work empty looms. Soon afterwards the emperor sent another honest courtier to the weavers to see how they were getting on, and if the cloth was nearly finished. Like the old minister, he looked and looked, but could see nothing, as there was nothing to be seen. Is it not a beautiful piece of cloth? Asked the swindlers, showing and explaining the magnificent pattern, which, however, did not exist. I am not stupid, said the man. It is therefore my good appointment for which I am not fit. It is very strange, but I must not let anyone know it. And he praised the cloth, for which he did not see, and expressed joy at the colors and the fine pattern. It is very excellent, he said to the emperor. And everybody in the whole town talked about the precious cloth, and at last the emperor wished to see it for himself, while it was still on the loom. And with a number of courtiers, including 2 who had already been there, he went to the 2 clever swindlers, who now worked as hard as they could, but without using any thread. Is it not magnificent? Said the 2 statesmen who had been there before. Your Majesty must admire the colors and the pattern. And they pointed to the empty loom, for they imagined others could see the cloth. What is this? Thought the emperor. I see nothing at all, and that is terrible. Am I stupid? Am I unfit to be emperor? That would indeed be the most dreadful thing to happen to me. Really, he said, turning to the weavers, your cloth has our most gracious approval. And nodding contentedly, he looked at the empty loom, for he did not like to say that he saw nothing. And all of his attendants who were with him looked, and though they could not see anything more than the others, they said, like the emperor, it is very beautiful. And all advised him to wear the new magnificent clothes in a great procession soon to take place. It is magnificent and beautiful and excellent, one of them said. Everybody seemed delighted, and the emperor appointed the swindlers as imperial court weavers. On the whole night, the previous day, which the procession was to take place, the swindlers pretended to work, and burned more than 16 candles, and people should see that they were busy to finish the emperor's new suit. And they pretended to take the cloth from the loom, and worked it about in the air with big scissors, and sewed with needles without thread, and said at last, "The emperor's new suit is ready now." And the emperor and all of his barons came to the hall, and the swindlers held up their arms as if they held something, and said, "These are the trousers, and this the coat, here is the cloak," and so on. They are all light as a cobweb, but one must feel as if one had nothing at all upon the body. That is the beauty. "Indeed," said all the courtiers, but they could not see anything, for there was nothing to be seen. "Does it please your majesty now to graciously undress," said the swindlers, "that we might assist your majesty in putting the new suit on before the large looking-glass?" And the emperor undressed, and the swindlers pretended to put the new suit upon him, one piece after another, and the emperor looked at himself in the mirror from every side. "How well they look, and how well they fit," said all, "and what a beautiful pattern, and what fine colors! This is a magnificent suit of clothes." And the master of ceremonies announced that the bearers of the canopy, which was to be carried in the procession, was ready. "I am ready," said the emperor. "Does not my fine suit fit me marvelously?" And then he turned once more to the looking-glass, that people should think he admired his garments. The chamberlains, who was to carry the train, stretched their hands out to the ground as if they lifted up a train, and pretended to hold something in their hands. They did not like people to know that they could not see anything. And the emperor marched in the procession under a beautiful canopy, and all who saw him in the street and out in the windows exclaimed, "Indeed, the emperor's new suit is incomparable. What a long train he has! How well it fits him!" No one wished to let others know that he saw nothing, for then he would have been seen unfit for his office or too stupid. Never had the emperor's clothes been more admired. "But he has nothing on at all," said a little child. "Good heavens!" "Listen to the voice of an innocent child," said his father, and one whispered to the other what the child said. "But he has nothing on at all," cried the whole people, and that made a deep impression on the emperor, for it seemed to him that they were right. But he thought to himself, "Now I must bear it to the end," and the chamberlains walked with greater dignity, as if they carried a train which did not exist. I will say, I think the original is marginally better than, like, every other version. Simply because it flat out says that, oh, either you weren't fit for your office or you were stupid. It's like, those are your options. Unfit for your service or dumb. I also appreciate the fact that everyone's first gut reaction was, "Oh, I'm not stupid, and I'm also fit for my office," as opposed to being like, "No, I know my job. Maybe I'm stupid." It's like, no, I'm very intelligent. I also like the fact that, so in a lot of retellings of the Emperor's New Clothes, and I probably don't have to tell you this, you probably know it, but in a lot of them, like, the weavers are caught. And in the original, that's not a thing. Like, clearly the entire population knows he's not wearing anything, and the Emperor's like, "Yeah, but I've already started this." There's no implication that anything happens to the swindlers. So I hope you had fun with that. I did. It was kind of nice and a lot less stressful. Let me do that. I will actually do another novel for the next one. But I hope all of you have a good night. See you next time.